Clara Whitfield had not slept in a bed since the night they buried her husband. She had spent 3 nights on the cold floor of a rotting ranch house, a rifle across her knees, and a notebook full of plans she prayed God would let her finish. She was not waiting to be saved. She was fighting to survive. And on the 4th morning, a stranger's horse stopped at her broken gate, and nothing would ever be the same again. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel, follow until the very last word, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The summer heat came down hard over the Montana mountains, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer above the dry grass and turned the creek beds into cracked ribbons of pale earth. Ethan Walker had ridden through heat like this 100 times. He knew how to read the land the way other men read newspapers, the angle of the sun, the way the wind moved through the pine, the stillness that settled over a place when something was wrong. He felt that stillness before he saw the ranch. His horse, a dark bay gelding named Colt, slowed without being asked. The animal had a sense about things. Ethan had learned years ago to trust it. He shifted in the saddle and looked down from the ridge into the shallow valley below, and what he saw made him pull the reins without thinking. The ranch had been something once. He could tell by the bones of it, the way the fence posts were spaced, the placement of the barn. The long stretch of flat land that would have held good crops before whatever had gone wrong went wrong. But the fence was down in 3 places. The barn door hung at an angle, one hinge gone. The fields were empty, and the main house, a 2-room structure with a porch that sagged on the left side, looked like it had been holding its breath for a very long time. What stopped Ethan was not the ruin of the place. It was the garden. Along the south wall of the house, someone had planted a garden. Not a wild, forgotten thing, a deliberate one. The rows were straight. The soil had been turned recently. Whoever lived here had gotten on their knees in the dirt and chosen against all visible evidence to keep something growing. He didn't understand it yet, but he felt it. Ethan nudged Colt down the ridge. He tied the horse at the gatepost, what remained of it, and walked toward the house on foot, the way a man should approach a stranger's property. He kept his hands loose at his sides, away from the holster. He had learned that lesson young. The fastest way to get shot on someone else's land was to come in like you already owned it. The porch steps groaned under his boots. He knocked on the open door frame. The door itself was leaning against the inside wall, unhinged. Someone had propped a wooden chair against it to keep it from falling. "Hello," he called. "Anybody home?" Nothing. He looked through the doorway and saw her. She was asleep on the floor near the cold fireplace, her back against the stone, a wool blanket pulled to her chin despite the heat. A rifle lay beside her right hand, close enough to grab in a single motion. Her dark hair had come loose from its braid and spread across the floorboards. There were smudges of dirt on her forearms, and a fresh cut along her left palm wrapped in a strip of cloth. She looked, Ethan thought, like a woman who had been fighting something for a very long time and had finally fallen asleep mid-battle. He took a step back onto the porch and cleared his throat loud. She was awake and on her feet and had the rifle pointed at him before he could draw another breath. "Don't," she said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were steady. Her eyes dark brown and absolutely certain, did not waver. "Not moving," Ethan said. He raised both hands, slow. "Just came to the door." "Why, saw the place from the ridge. Wanted to make sure everything was all right." "Everything is fine." She didn't lower the rifle. "You can go." "Yes, ma'am." He didn't move. "You sure about that? That cut on your hand looks like it could use—" "I said go." He studied her for a moment. She was younger than he'd expected. Maybe late 20s. She was wearing a man's work shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and her boots were caked with the same pale clay that covered the garden outside. There was nothing fragile about her, nothing that wanted his help. But there was something in her jaw, something in the set of her shoulders that told him she was holding up more weight than one person ought to carry. "My name's Ethan Walker," he said. "I run the Walker spread up on the North Ridge, about 8 miles from here. I know who you are." The rifle stayed where it was. "What do you want?" "Right now, just to know you're all right." "I'm fine." You're sleeping on your floor with a rifle. And you're standing on my porch without an invitation." She took one step forward. "So one of us has worse manners than the other. And it ain't me." Ethan almost smiled. He stopped himself. "You're Clara Whitfield," he said. Something moved across her face. Not fear. Something quieter and harder than fear. "My husband's name was Daniel Whitfield," she said. "This is the Whitfield Ranch. I am keeping it that way. Whatever business brought you up that ridge, it's not my business, and it's time for you to ride back down it." "Yes, ma'am." He lowered his hands, took one step back, then another. But before he turned, he looked at the garden along the south wall. He let himself look at it long enough that she would know he'd seen it. The straight rows, the fresh-turned earth. "That's good work," he said, quietly, not as a compliment to soften her up, just as a fact. He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and walked back to his horse and rode back up the ridge. He didn't look back, but he thought about that garden for the rest of the ride home. Nin. Clara watched him go until the horse disappeared over the ridge. Then she stood alone on the broken porch and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She lowered the rifle. Her hands were shaking now. They always did after. When she was holding the gun, she was steady as stone. It was only when the danger passed, or she thought it had, that her body remembered it was afraid. She sat down on the porch steps and pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. Daniel had been dead for 4 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days. She had stopped counting hours somewhere around the end of the 2nd month. The days were hard enough. He had died in March when the last of the winter snow was still in the shadows of the pines. A fever that had started as a cough and moved fast the way things did out here, away from town, away from doctors. She had boiled water and changed compresses and sat beside him through 4 nights of watching his breathing change in ways that terrified her. And on the 5th morning, he had taken her hand and told her the same thing he had been telling her since the day they married. "You're going to be all right, Clara." She hadn't believed him then. She wasn't sure she believed him now. But she was still here, and the land was still hers, and she was going to keep it that way if it killed her. The ranch had come to Daniel from his father, who had cleared the original homestead by hand in a summer so hot it had burned the grass black. 240 acres of Montana Valley land, with a creek that ran reliable 9 months out of 12, and soil that properly worked, would grow more than most people expected this far up into the mountains. It was not the richest land in the county, but it was theirs, and it was paid for in labor and years in a way that no bank document could adequately record. When Daniel died, Clara had learned very quickly that not everyone agreed with her understanding of what was hers. The first man had come in April, a representative from the Peeland Land and Commerce Company, riding a horse that cost more than Clara had earned in 3 years. He had been polite in the particular way that certain men were polite to women. They did not take seriously soft-voiced, condescending his hat held in both hands, like an offering. He had papers, he said. Signed papers, indicating that Daniel Whitfield had taken a loan against the land. Clara had read the papers 3 times while the man stood in her front room, and each time she read them, she felt something cold move through her chest. "My husband never told me about any loan," she said. "Well, ma'am." The man smiled. "Sometimes men don't share every financial matter with their wives. Daniel shared everything with me, be that as it may." He gestured at the papers. "The debt is recorded, the interest has accrued, and I'm afraid if payment isn't made within 60 days, get out of my house." He looked surprised. Then he smoothed his expression back into patience. "Mrs. Whitfield, I understand this is a difficult time, but the law is quite clear. I said get out." She had picked up the rifle from the corner. She hadn't pointed it at him. She hadn't needed to. "You come back to my door with those papers again, you'd better bring something I can actually read and believe, because whatever that is, it is not my husband's signature." He had left, but he had come back, twice. Different men each time. Same papers, same polite voices, same eyes that moved around the room, calculating what everything was worth without looking at her at all. And now it was July, and the 60 days were nearly up. Clara went back inside and put the rifle against the wall and looked at the room with the practiced eye of a woman taking inventory. The table was solid. She had cleaned it that morning. The tools were hung in order along the east wall. The notebook on the shelf beside the fireplace, the one Daniel had given her for her birthday 2 years ago, leather-covered, half-filled with her own handwriting, was open to a page dense with numbers and plans. How much it would cost to repair the fence. How many cattle she would need to make the land productive again. What she could grow in the south field if she could get the soil turned before August. She had plans. She had always had plans. What she was running short of was time. She crossed to the shelf and picked up the notebook and stood there in the empty house reading the numbers she had written in her own careful hand. Then she closed it and pressed it against her chest for a moment, not for comfort exactly. More as a reminder. This was real. The plans were real. The land was real. And she was real, even when this house felt like it was built out of grief and stubbornness alone. "You're going to be all right, Clara," she said to herself. She said it the way Daniel used to say it. She had been practicing. Ethan Walker did not go back to the Whitfield place the next day, or the day after. He went back on the 4th day and he brought a fence post. Not as an excuse. Not as a strategy. He brought it because he had ridden past the south boundary of her land on his way to check his upper pasture, and he had seen that the corner post was down and that 2 rails were on the ground, and that the gap was large enough for cattle to walk through, except that she had no cattle anymore. So the only thing walking through it was the slow deterioration of a ranch without enough hands to hold it together. He dropped the post and rails at the gap and went back for his tools. He was on the 2nd rail when he heard her footsteps behind him. "What are you doing?" He kept working. "Fixing your fence." "I didn't ask you to do that." "No, ma'am, you didn't." A pause. He could feel her standing behind him, working out what to do with this. "You can't just come onto someone's property and start—" "You're right," he said. He drove the 2nd rail into place and straightened up and turned to look at her. "You want me to stop, I'll stop. Just say the word." She was wearing the same work shirt, different trousers. The cut on her palm had been redressed with a cleaner bandage. She had her arms crossed and her chin up, and she was looking at him the way she had looked at him from behind the rifle, steady, cautious, trying to read what he was. "Why are you doing this?" she said. Ethan set down his hammer and pushed his hat back and looked at her straight. He had found over 42 years of living that most problems between people came from not looking at each other straight. "Because your fence is down," he said, "and I know how to fix it, and fixing it takes an hour. And not fixing it for you alone with everything else you're dealing with might take a week or never happen at all. That's my problem." "Yes, ma'am, it is." He picked the hammer back up. "But I'm already here." She stared at him. He went back to work. He heard her make a sound that was not quite a word and not quite a curse, and then her footsteps moved away, and a few minutes later, they came back, and she was carrying the other fence rail he had dropped in the grass. She didn't say anything. She just handed it to him. He took it without comment. They worked in silence for a while. It was Ethan had always believed the most honest kind of working. You found out more about a person from an hour of shared silence than from an hour of conversation. The way Clara moved was careful and deliberate. She didn't waste motion. She didn't ask questions she could answer by watching. When he needed a rail held steady, she held it steady, and when he drove the nail, she kept her hands clear without being told to. She knew how to work. That much was plain. "How long have you had this place?" he asked after a while. "Daniel's family built it when he was 12. A pause. "We've been here together 9 years. And before, I'm from outside Billings. My family ran cattle." "You know the work then." "I know the work," she said. There was something in her voice when she said it, not pride exactly, something more like grief folded into certainty. She knew the work. She had always known the work, and the work had not been enough to save him. Ethan didn't push. Duh. They finished the fence in just over an hour. Ethan gathered his tools, and Clara stood and looked at the repaired section with her hands on her hips, and the expression on her face was not gratitude exactly, but something adjacent to it, a kind of exhausted relief that she was trying very hard not to show. "What do you actually want?" she said. She turned to look at him. "Nobody does something for nothing, especially not out here." "I need access to the mountain spring on your upper pasture," he said. "My lower creek has been running low all summer. There's an old water right that comes with this land. I'd like to work out an arrangement." Clara looked at him for a long moment. He could see her processing it, the offer, the terms, the question of whether this was what it appeared to be or something with a hidden edge. "You want to buy the water right," she said. "I want to lease it, monthly, fair price, negotiated between us, nothing going through a middleman." He met her eyes. "I'm not interested in your land, Mrs. Whitfield. I have more land than I know what to do with already. I just need water." "And the fence?" "The fence is a fence. It needed fixing." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got." She looked away. She looked at the fence, and then at the house, and then at the garden along the south wall. Her jaw worked silently, like she was chewing over words before letting them out. "My husband," she said finally, "trusted people too easily sometimes. He saw the good in folks before they'd earned the right to be seen that way." She turned back to Ethan. "I loved that about him, and I watched it cost him. So, you'll understand if I am not in the business of taking men at their word." "I understand that completely." "Then you'll understand that I'm not making any arrangement with you today." "Yes, ma'am." "And you'll understand that the next time you come onto my property without an invitation, I will not be as patient as I was this morning." "Understood." She nodded once, sharp, definitive. He picked up his tools, tipped his hat, and walked back to his horse. He was mounting up when she called after him. "Mr. Walker." He looked back. She was standing with her arms at her sides now, the crossed arm armor down, and she looked for just a moment like a woman who was very tired and very alone, and was trying to decide how much of that to let show. "The water right is in the northeast corner of the upper pasture," she said. "I'll need to see any arrangement in writing, both names on it. Equal terms." He held her gaze. "I'll have something written up by the end of the week." She didn't smile. But something in her expression shifted barely, almost imperceptibly, towards something that was not quite the same as the wariness she'd been carrying. "End of the week," she said, and turned back toward the house. Ethan rode home. The papers from the Peeland Company were on Clara's table when she came back inside. She had taken them out again that morning to read them for what felt like the 100th time, looking for the thing she knew she had to find the specific evidence that what they claimed was a lie. Daniel's signature appeared on 3 documents: loan agreement, collateral schedule, payment terms. His name in careful, even letters, the same way he wrote everything. Except that it wasn't. Clara had lived with Daniel Whitfield for 9 years. She had read every letter he had ever sent her, every note he had left on the kitchen table, every line of the deed to this land, signed on the day they had finally paid it clear. She knew the way he made his capital D, the slight leftward lean of the upstroke, the way the loop never fully closed. She knew the way he crossed his lowercase t slightly high and sharply angled. The signatures on the Peeland documents were close. Very close. Someone had taken time with them, but they were wrong. She had known it from the first moment she had seen them, and the knowing had sat in her chest like a stone ever since, because knowing something and proving it were 2 entirely different things. She sat down at the table and opened the notebook and wrote across the top of a fresh page, "What I know, what I can prove, what I need." She had been writing lists like this since Daniel died. It was the only way she had found to keep the shape of things from dissolving into grief. What I know. These are not Daniel's signatures. The Peeland Company is lying. Someone with access to Daniel's records forged these documents. The intent is to take this land. What I can prove. Nothing yet. What I need: original records. A lawyer. Time I don't have. She sat with the list for a long time. Then she wrote underneath it in smaller letters: Ethan Walker. North Ridge. Water rights. End of the week. She wasn't sure why she wrote it down. It wasn't part of the problem she was solving. It was just a fact. A new fact in a life that had been too short on new things for 4 months, 2 weeks, and however many days it was now. She closed the notebook. Outside, the evening light was coming down gold through the window, and the garden along the south wall was throwing long shadows in the dirt. Clara got up and went outside and stood in the last of the light and looked at the rows she had planted. Tomatoes, beans, a single row of sunflowers along the edge that had no practical use whatsoever, and that she had planted anyway, because Daniel used to say that a home without something beautiful in it was just a building. She put her hands in the soil. She turned a handful of earth and felt the warmth it had stored all day, and let herself think for just one moment not about the documents or the debt, or the 60 days, or the water rights, or the man from the North Ridge who fixed fences without being asked. She thought about Daniel. She thought about the way he used to stand in this exact spot in the evening light and say, "You're going to be all right, Clara," like it was both a promise and a prayer. She pressed the handful of earth back into the row. "I know," she said quietly to no one, to him, to herself, to the mountains and the fading sky and the broken house that she was going to fix, whether it killed her or not. "I know I am." Yeah. 3 days later, a man named Holt Pearson rode up to the ranch. He was not from the Peeland Company. He rode alone, and he did not bother to tie his horse at the gate. He rode it right up to the porch steps, which was the kind of thing a man did when he wanted you to know you were not the one setting the terms of a conversation. Clara came to the door with the rifle because she had learned. Pearson was broad and sun-darkened and had a smile that did not touch anything above his mouth. He wore a badge on his lapel, County Deputy, and the badge was as well polished as everything else about him and just as honest. "Morning, Mrs. Whitfield." "Deputy." "Just paying a courtesy visit." He looked at the rifle with an expression of patient amusement. "Don't suppose you need that for a courtesy visit." "I decide what I need on my own porch," she said. "What do you want?" "Just to let you know the situation." He shifted in the saddle. "I've had communication from the Peeland Company's attorneys. Seems like the payment deadline is coming up fast." "I'm aware of that. They've asked me to convey that if payment isn't made, they'll be initiating formal proceedings to take possession of the property." The words landed in her chest like stones dropped into cold water. She had known this was coming. She had told herself she knew this was coming. But hearing it said out loud officially by a man with a badge made it different. She kept her face still. "They can try," she said. Pearson studied her. "Mrs. Whitfield, I say this as someone who has no wish to see a widow woman put off her land. But what you're talking about going up against the Peeland Company has lawyers in 3 cities, and they've done this before. More than once." He paused. "There's no shame in taking a fair offer and moving on." "There's no fair offer," she said. "They're prepared to offer you, Deputy Pearson." Her voice was quiet and exact. "My husband did not borrow money from those people. Whoever signed those papers, it was not Daniel Whitfield, and I can prove it." The first time she had said those words, "I can prove it," they had been a gamble. She had been saying them to convince herself as much as anyone else. Now, standing on her porch with the morning sun at her back and a rifle in her hands, and 4 months of grief and fury, and sleepless nights behind her, she was beginning slowly to believe them. Pearson looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked past her at the house, at the garden, at the mountains behind. "I hope you know what you're doing," he said. "I know exactly what I'm doing," she said. "Good morning, Deputy." He tipped his hat. He rode away. Clara stood on the porch until the dust settled. Then she went inside, picked up the notebook, and started making a new list. Ethan came on Friday with a paper in his hand. He did not ride up to the porch this time. He stopped at the gate, dismounted, and walked to the edge of the property and stood there until she appeared at the window. She came out. He held out the paper. It was 2 pages handwritten, clean and clear. A lease agreement for access to the northeast corner. Water right. Monthly terms, equal consideration, both their names in the proper places. At the bottom was a blank line for her signature, and beside it, another blank line for a witness. "I had a lawyer in town write it up," he said. "Man named Haskell. He's straight. You can take it to someone else for a second opinion if you'd like. I don't mind waiting." Clara read it. She read it twice the way she had learned to read everything now, looking for the hidden clause, the embedded cost, the small print that would turn out to matter most. There was nothing. She looked up at him. "Why a witness line?" "Because any agreement worth making is worth making in front of someone who'll remember it," he said. "That's the way I do things." She looked at the paper again. Then she said, "Come inside." He followed her into the house. She went to the shelf and took down the notebook and came back to the table and set the peel-in documents beside the lease agreement and stood there looking at both sets of papers. "I need to tell you something," she said, "about why I can't simply take whatever help you're offering and not think twice about it." All right. She told him about the Peeland Company. She told him about the forged signatures, the deputy's visit, the 60 days, the deadline she was watching come toward her like a freight train on a downhill grade. She told him straight without embellishment, the way she told herself things when she was trying to think clearly. When she finished, the house was quiet. Ethan looked at the documents. He looked at them the way he had looked at her garden on the first day, a long, careful look that was not performing anything. "You said you can prove the signatures are forged," he said. "I said I'd prove it. I haven't yet." "What do you need to prove it?" "I need Daniel's original handwriting, something official dated before those documents were supposedly signed. And I need someone with authority to compare them and say so in front of a judge." He was quiet for a moment. "I knew Daniel Whitfield," he said. Clara looked up. "Not well," Ethan said. "We met twice at the county land office 3 years back when I was filing an expansion on my upper pasture. He was there about some water boundary issue. We talked maybe an hour, 2 hours over 2 visits." He paused. "He struck me as a very careful man. The kind of man who would not sign something he hadn't read." "He was," she said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "He was exactly that kind of man." "Then those are not his signatures." "I know. And the county land office will have records from those visits, the original survey documents Daniel signed, dated witnessed official." Clara stared at him. She had been so deep in the immediate crisis, the fence, the food, the daily fight to keep the place from falling apart, that she had not thought 3 years back to the county land office. She had not thought about the documents Daniel had signed there in the presence of clerks and witnesses and official county records that lived in a vault in the courthouse. "The land office," she said slowly. "I have business there next week," Ethan said. "I can pull the file, request copies of the original documents." He looked at her steadily. "With your permission." Clara looked at the documents on the table. Then she looked at the lease agreement still in her hand. Then she looked at Ethan Walker, who had come back to her fence with a post and a hammer, and no explanation beyond it needed fixing, and who had written up a 2-page lease agreement with a witness line, because that was the way he did things. She picked up a pen. She signed the lease agreement. "Get the documents," she said. Ethan looked at the signature. Something moved through his expression, not triumph. Something quieter, like a man who has been waiting to see if something was real and has just received his answer. He folded the lease agreement and put it in his jacket pocket. "I'll be back Thursday," he said. "Thursday," she said. He walked to the door. Then he stopped, and without turning around, he said something that she was not expecting. "My wife died 6 years ago. Fever same as Daniel. We had this place on the North Ridge, and then it was just me on it." A pause. "I'm not telling you that, so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling you so you'll know I understand something about what it costs to keep going when keeping going is all you have left." The house was very quiet. "Thursday," she said again. Softer this time, He nodded once and walked out the door. Clara stood alone in the house with the documents on the table and the notebook on the shelf, and the evening light coming through the window, and her heart doing something she hadn't felt it do in 4 months, 2 weeks, and however many days. It wasn't hope. Not yet. But it was something that might, if she was very careful with it, become hope. She picked up the pen and opened the notebook. At the top of a new page, she wrote Thursday. Thursday came with a wind that pushed hard down from the mountains, the kind that carried the smell of pine and distance and something that felt almost like a warning. Clara had been awake since before first light. She had told herself it was because the barn door was banging loose again and the sound had pulled her out of sleep, which was partly true. But she had also lain awake in the dark for a long time before the banging started, her eyes on the ceiling, and her mind running the same circuit it had been running all week. The documents, the signatures, the deadline, the land office. Thursday. She had the coffee on and the notebook open when she heard Colt's hooves on the dry ground outside. She did not go to the door right away. She poured a second cup, set it on the table across from hers, and then went to the door. Ethan was tying his horse at the post. He had a leather satchel across his shoulder, the kind men use to carry papers, and he was moving with the particular focus of a man who had somewhere to be and something to deliver. He saw her in the doorway and gave one short nod. "Morning," he said. "Coffee's on," she said, and stepped back inside. He came in, set the satchel on the table, and sat down across from her without being invited, which she had decided somewhere between Monday and Thursday she would allow. He picked up the coffee cup, drank, and then opened the satchel, and set 3 documents on the table between them. Clara looked at them. They were official county land office forms, stamped and dated 3 years prior, bearing Daniel's name at the bottom of each one. She knew his handwriting before she even leaned close. She felt it, the specific electricity of seeing a dead man's hand in the world, again reaching out of the past in ink and paper. She leaned close and looked at the D, the slight leftward lean, the loop that never quite closed. "These are his," she said. "I know." She picked up one of the Peelan documents and held it next to the county form. The difference was not large. A careful forger had done this. Someone who had access to Daniel's handwriting and had studied it and practiced it and done a competent job. But Clara had 9 years of reading his grocery lists and his letters and his notes left on the kitchen table, and she could see it, the D that was almost right, the T crossing that was almost correct, the loop that closed where it should have stayed open. Someone had to see his real handwriting to copy it, she said. Yes, which means someone with access to his records, his letters, his official documents. Ethan wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. Or someone at the county land office who pulled his file and had it long enough to study it. Clara set the papers down. She was very still. "You think there's someone in the county office?" "I think it's possible," he said. "I'm not saying it's certain, but whoever forged these knew Daniel's hand well enough to come close. That's not a guess off the street." She sat back and pressed her palms flat on the table and looked at the ceiling for a moment, and then looked at Ethan. "If it goes to a county judge," she said, "and there's someone inside the county system who's already involved in this, then you need a judge who isn't in the county system," he said. "Circuit court, federal jurisdiction. That takes money. Some. I don't have some." Ethan set down his cup. He said it plainly without ceremony. "I'll front the cost. You can pay me back from the water lease revenue. We write it into the agreement." Clara looked at him. She wanted to say no. The word was right there, shaped and ready the way it always was when a man offered something that felt too useful. Because useful things always had costs that didn't show up on the first page. "Why?" she said. "Because the Peelan Company has been doing this for 6 years, Ethan said. His voice had changed, not louder, but harder underneath like stone under grass. 3 families in the North County alone. I watched them take the Harmon place 2 years ago. Old man Harmon had a bad back and no children and no one in his corner, and they walked him off his land with a piece of paper that wasn't worth the ink on it." He looked straight at her. "I had the means to help him. I didn't. I told myself it wasn't my business." He paused. "I'm not making that mistake again." The kitchen was very quiet. Clara looked at the documents on the table. Her husband's handwriting, real and forged side by side, one reaching across the years toward her, and the other reaching toward everything she had left. "This is my fight," she said. "Yes." "I lead it. My decisions." "Yes." "Your support, not rescue. That's all I'm offering." She looked at him for a long moment. She was reading him, the way she read documents now, looking for the hidden clause, the buried condition. What she found instead was something that looked improbably like a man who was telling her the exact truth about what he was and was not. She gathered the documents into a single pile and squared the edges and set them in the center of the table. "I need a lawyer who can take this to circuit court," she said. "Not Haskell. Someone with federal experience." "There's a man named August Reeves in Billings," Ethan said. "He's handled 2 federal land cases that I know of. Won both. Can you get me a meeting? I can send a wire today." "Do it," she said. He finished his coffee in one last swallow and picked up the satchel. He was at the door when Clara said his name. She hadn't used it before, not directly, and he stopped. "Ethan." He turned. "What the Pelland Company did to the Harmon family," she said. "What they did to the other families. Do you know the names of those people?" "I know the Harmons," he said. "The others I know the land, not the families." "Find the families," she said. "If this goes to circuit court, I don't want to walk in there alone." Something shifted in Ethan Walker's face. It was not a smile. It was something further back than a smile, something that lived in a place that didn't see light very often. "I'll find them," he said. He walked out. Clara listened to Colt's hooves fade down the trail, and then turned back to the table and looked at the documents, and felt something clarify inside her chest. The particular feeling of a battle that has been formless and terrifying, suddenly becoming concrete with edges and weight, and the specific shape of something that can be fought. She pulled the notebook toward her and opened it to a clean page. She wrote at the top, "Reeves, Billings, Circuit Court, the Harmons." Then she wrote one more name below those, Pelland. She underlined it twice. The wire to August Reeves went out that afternoon. Clara had ridden into town to send it herself. She had decided sometime in the last 2 weeks that she was finished conducting her business at a distance, finished waiting for people to come to her on her broken porch and deliver news she wasn't ready for. If something needed doing, she would go and do it. The telegraph office in Dunmore was run by a man named Cleary, who had the restless eyes of someone who read every message that passed through his hands, which was. Clara had long suspected every message that passed through his hands. She handed him the wire she had written out. He read it. His expression did not change, but his eyes moved over the words a second time. "Sending to August Reeves," he said. "That's what it says. In Billings. Also what it says." He looked at her. "Reeves is a federal lawyer, Mrs. Whitfield." "I'm aware of that, Mr. Cleary." A pause. His voice dropped like he was being kind. "Whatever you're tangled up in there, might be easier ways to handle it. The Pelland Company is a reasonable organization. I've heard they work with people in difficult—" "Send the wire," Clara said. She said it the way she said everything now, quiet, exact, without room for a second interpretation. Cleary sent the wire. Clara walked out into the summer heat and stood on the boardwalk and breathed. She had known riding into town that it would feel like this, the specific sensation of being watched, of people looking sideways at her, and then away, of being the woman whose husband had died, and who was making trouble about it instead of accepting the natural order of things. She had been aware of the whispers since April. She could read them in the slight hesitation at the dry goods counter, the way Mrs. Alcott at the post office asked after her health with a sympathy that had too much relish in it. The men at the feed store who went quiet when she came in and stayed quiet until she left. A widow woman fighting the Pelland Company was either brave or foolish. Most of Dunmore, Clara suspected, had placed their bets on foolish. She was getting her horse when she heard her name. Clara Whitfield. She turned. The woman coming toward her across the street was about 60, broad-shouldered, with gray hair pulled tight and a jaw like a closed fist. She was moving with the deliberate energy of someone who had been watching and waiting for an opening. "Margaret Harmon," Clara said. She had known Margaret Harmon by sight for years. The wife of the old man Ethan had mentioned the family who had lost their land 2 years ago. Clara had seen her at the general store and nodded to her and thought nothing more of it, the way you didn't think more about other people's troubles when your own life was full. Margaret Harmon stopped in front of her and looked her over with the quick, thorough appraisal of a woman who did not have time to waste. "I heard you sent a wire to August Reeves," she said. Clara went very still. "I sent that wire 20 minutes ago." "I know." Margaret Harmon did not seem at all embarrassed about this. Cleary talks. Always has. She moved a step closer. "I also heard you've been going through your husband's documents. Land office records." "Who told you that?" "Doesn't matter who told me. What matters is that I have something you need." She glanced once left, once right along the street. "Not here. Come to my house. Today if you can." Clara looked at her. She thought about this pattern she had established. The careful wariness, the reading for hidden clauses, the question of, what do you actually want? She ran Margaret Harmon through it and found something unexpected. A woman who was not hiding anything. Whose face and voice and jaw were carrying the same thing Clara saw in the mirror every morning. Grief and fury, and the absolute refusal to let the fury go. "I can come today," Clara said. Margaret Harmon's house was on the east edge of town, a modest place she rented since losing the ranch, and it was furnished with the particular spareness of someone who had once had more and had made their peace with it in the determined way that did not actually mean peace. She put coffee on without asking, and sat across from Clara at a table that was smaller than the one at the Whitfield Ranch, and then she put a wooden box on the table between them. "My husband kept records," she said. Reginald was the kind of man who wrote everything down. Every transaction, every conversation, every agreement made and broken. She put her hand on the box. "The Pelland Company came after our land the same way they came after yours. Documents my husband supposedly signed. A debt he supposedly owed." "He didn't owe it," Clara said. "He did not." Margaret's jaw tightened. "Same story. Different name on the paper." "What's in the box?" "Reg's records going back 15 years, including the date and place of every time he signed his name to an official document." She opened the box. Inside, Clara could see a stack of papers ordered and bound with dates written on the outside of each bundle. "What I couldn't prove, what I didn't know to look for, was what you figured out. The handwriting." She looked at Clara steadily. "But I have something you don't." She reached into the box and drew out a separate envelope sealed. "I have the name of the man inside the county land office who pulled Reg's records the month before the Pelland papers were filed." She set the envelope on the table. "A clerk named Dern. He was let go 3 months after the Harmon case closed. Moved to Nevada far as anyone knows. But I have his name in writing, in a letter from another clerk who saw him pull the files. She didn't speak up at the time because she was afraid." Margaret Harmon's eyes were very clear and very hard. She wasn't afraid anymore when she wrote that letter. "She wrote it to me last November, and then she moved to her daughters in Oregon, and I've been sitting on it waiting for someone who had a reason to use it." "Kindi shume no." Clara looked at the envelope. The room felt very still. "You've been waiting," she said. "I lost my land," Margaret said. "I can't get it back. Reg is gone now too hard 18 months ago. I have nothing left for them to take." She pushed the envelope across the table. "But you still have your land. And if Reeves takes this to circuit court, that letter is the difference between a case and a conviction." Clara picked up the envelope. Her hands were steady. She was good at steady now. She had practiced it. "Why give this to me?" she said. "Why not go to Reeves yourself?" Margaret Harmon looked at her with the expression of a woman who has long since stopped having patience for questions with obvious answers. "Because I'm 62 years old and I'm tired," she said. "And because you're still in the fight and I'm not, and the best I can do now is hand the ammunition to someone who can still aim." She closed the wooden box. "Don't waste it. Clara put the envelope in her coat pocket. "I won't," she said. She rode back to the ranch in the long afternoon light with the envelope pressed against her ribs and her mind running faster than colt's hooves on the dry road. Everything she had collected was beginning to arrange itself into the shape of something real, not just evidence, but a story, the kind of story that a circuit court judge could follow from beginning to end and arrive at the truth. Daniel's original handwriting at the county land office. The forged signatures on the Peelan documents. A county clerk named Dern who had pulled Daniel's files before the forgery. Margaret Harmon's sealed letter. It was not enough yet. But it was the bones of enough. She had one foot off her horse when she saw the buggy. It was parked in front of her house. Fine leather seats, lacquered wood. The kind of conveyance that announced money before the owner had to say a word. Two men stood beside it, both in town clothes, both watching her come down the trail with the particular patient stillness of men who were used to waiting, because they were used to the waiting always eventually going their way. She did not slow her pace. She dismounted, tied her horse, and walked straight to the porch steps and stopped there and looked at them. The taller one, who had the kind of face that had been handsome once and had curdled into something that knew it, stepped forward. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said. "My name is Jonas Pell." She had known that from the first sight of the buggy. She had known who this would be. Jonas Pell was the man whose name was on every Pell and Company document. Not a representative, not a lawyer, the man himself. She said nothing. "I thought it was time we spoke directly," he said. He smiled. It was a practiced smile, warm on the surface, and empty all the way down. "The company has been represented by intermediaries up to now, and I think that's been unfortunate. These situations always go more smoothly when people can simply speak plainly to each other." "Then speak plainly," Clara said. He looked briefly surprised. Men like this were usually surprised when the person they were speaking to did not let them control the pace of the conversation. "The debt is real," he said. "The documents are legal. I understand that losing a husband is a terrible thing, and I'm genuinely sorry for your loss." He paused in a way that was designed to suggest sincerity. "But sentiment doesn't change the legal record. The land is collateral. What we're offering, what I am personally prepared to offer you today, is a settlement. A generous one. Enough for you to start somewhere new." "I'm not starting somewhere new," Clara said. "Mrs. Whitfield, my husband did not sign those documents." She said it clearly, not loudly, in the voice she used for facts. "I know his handwriting. I have his original county records, and I have a federal attorney reviewing the matter." She looked at Jonas Pell without flinching. "You came here today because you heard I sent a wire to August Reeves in Billings, which means you have someone watching the telegraph office, which means you're not as confident about those documents as you'd like me to believe." Something moved behind Jonas Pell's eyes. The practiced warmth went very thin. "That's a serious allegation," he said. "You're standing on my land," she said. "Everything I say here is on my land." The second man shifted. He was broader, with the look of muscle kept for purposes other than cattle work, and he had not spoken once, which was its own kind of language. Jonas Pell looked at Clara for a long moment. He had the eyes she thought of a man who had mistaken his entire life for evidence of his own intelligence. "I'll give you a week," he said, "to reconsider." "I don't need a week," she said, "but if you'd like to give me one, I'll take it." His jaw tightened just slightly. "You're making this very difficult for yourself." "I reckon I am," she said. "Good evening, Mr. Pell." She turned and went inside and closed the door. She stood in the kitchen and listened to the buggy drive away and counted to 20 before she let herself lean against the wall and put a hand over her heart, which was hammering with an intensity she had not let herself show on the porch. He had come himself. That meant the wire to Reeves had rattled something. That meant the documents were not as airtight as they had been presenting them. She pulled out the notebook and wrote, "Pell came in person. 1 week. They're nervous." Then she wrote, "Good." Ethan was back at her gate before supper. He had seen the buggy on the road. He'd recognized the Pell and livery and turned around and come straight from wherever he'd been heading. He did not come in this time. He stood at the gate, and Clara came out and stood on the porch, and they talked across the distance between them, which was still how it felt most natural, still the appropriate measure. She told him about Jonas Pell, about what had been said and what hadn't been said, and what the visit meant in terms of where the company stood. When she finished, Ethan was quiet for a moment. "He came himself," he said. "Yes. Men like that don't come themselves unless they need something only they can get." "That's what I thought." "He was reading you," Ethan said, "trying to figure out how solid your case is, how scared you are." "I know. What did he see?" Clara considered. "Someone who wasn't scared enough to take his offer." "Good." Ethan looked at her. "Reeves wired back. He can meet Friday next. He'll come here." "Here." "He said it's better to see the property before he reviews the documents. He's done this before." A pause. "He also said the Dern connection, if you can prove it, is significant. Wire fraud and forgery go federal a lot faster if there's a corrupt county official involved." Clara felt the specific dangerous sensation of real hope, not the fragile, desperate kind she had been carefully protecting since March. This was heavier, more specific. "Margaret Harmon has Dern's name," she said, "in writing." Ethan went very still. "From whom?" "A clerk who saw him pull the files." She watched Ethan's face. "She wrote the letter to Margaret last November. Margaret has been sitting on it." Ethan looked at the sky for a moment, not up, not thinking, just the reflex of a man absorbing something important before he speaks. "That's not just evidence against Pelland," he said. "That's evidence of a pattern. If there's a clerk in the system who was pulling files to enable forgeries, Pelland didn't just do this to Daniel. They have a method." "3 families in the North County," Clara said. "That's what you told me." "At least. Which means at least 3 sets of original records, at least 3 instances of someone inside the system pulling files." She stopped. Something was taking shape in her mind that was larger than her own case, larger than her own land. "Ethan, if August Reeves takes this to circuit court, and it's only about my land, I might win." He looked at her. "But if it's about a pattern, about a system, then it's not just my land that gets right," she said. He was very quiet. "You understand what you're saying," he said. "It was not a question. I'm saying I want to find the other families. That's a larger case. More time. More exposure. Pell already knows you're fighting. If he figures out you're trying to build something bigger, he'll move faster," she said. "I know." She looked at Ethan with the same steadiness she had pointed at him from behind a rifle on the first morning. "I know, but those families lost their land, the same way my land is being taken. And I have something Margaret Harmon didn't have." She paused. "I still have mine." Ethan stood at the gate in the evening light and looked at her for a long moment. She knew what he saw. A woman who had started this with a rifle and a notebook, and 60 days left on a fraudulent clock, and who had arrived in the span of 2 weeks at the threshold of something that was no longer just about one ranch on a Montana mountain. "I'll find the families," he said. Again. The same words he had said the first time, but heavier now with more weight behind them. "There's something else," Clara said. He waited. "Jonas Pell gave me a week." She crossed her arms. "He thinks that's a threat. And I think it's a deadline we can use." She held his gaze. "A week to get Reeves up here. A week to pull together every piece of evidence we have. A week to give Pell exactly enough silence that he decides I've gone quiet because I'm beaten." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then, for the first time since she had known him, which was not long, but felt already like a longer kind of knowing, something happened at the corner of his mouth that was unmistakably a smile. It lasted about 2 seconds. "You're not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect? Honestly?" He looked at the ranch, then back at her. Someone who needed more saving than this. Clara felt something move through her that she hadn't felt in months. Not quite a smile either. Something earlier than a smile. "Everyone needs something," she said. "The difference is what you do about it." She turned and went back inside before either of them had to figure out what to do with the rest of that. She heard Colt's hooves on the trail going north. She stood in the kitchen in the dark for a moment, not turning the lamp on, just standing, and thought about Daniel. About the notebook. About Margaret Harmon's box on the small table in the rented house on the east edge of town. About 3 families in the North County whose names she didn't know yet. About August Reeves arriving Friday next. About 1 week. She turned the lamp on. She opened the notebook. She started writing, and she did not stop until the lamp needed refilling, and the mountain dark was absolute outside, and the words on the page had the clear specific shape of a plan that was no longer just hers. August Reeves arrived on a Friday morning with a leather briefcase, a close-trimmed beard, and the unhurried manner of a man who had been in enough courtrooms to know that panic was the enemy of truth. He was younger than Clara had expected, mid-40s, lean, with sharp eyes that moved across everything in the room, the way a surveyor's moved across land measuring without appearing to measure. He sat at Clara's kitchen table and read every document without speaking. She watched him. Ethan sat across from her, his coffee cup untouched, his hands folded, and still in the way that she had come to recognize as his version of patience, not passive, but held like a man keeping his energy close until it was needed. Reeves read the Pill-End documents first, then the County Land Office originals. Then Margaret Harmon's sealed letter, which Clara had opened the night before and read 3 times, and then resealed with a strip of paste because it felt wrong to hand it to a lawyer crumpled. When he finished, he set everything down and looked at Clara. "Tell me in your own words," he said, "what you know, what you believe, and the difference between them." Clara had been preparing for this question for a week without knowing she was preparing for it. She told him straight the timeline. The signatures, the deputy's visit, Jonas Pell's personal appearance, the wire to the telegraph office that Cleary had clearly passed along within the hour. She told him about Dern, the county clerk whose name was in Margaret Harmon's letter from a woman named Alice Pratt, now in Oregon, who had watched Dern pull Daniel Whitfield's file and said nothing until she was safely gone. Reeves listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up the letter again and read the specific section a second time. "Alice Pratt," he said. "She's willing to testify." "She wrote the letter voluntarily," Clara said. "Whether she'll come back from Oregon to testify in Montana, that I don't know yet. I'll need to know." He set the letter down. "Her testimony is the linchpin. Documents can be argued. Handwriting experts can be countered with other handwriting experts. But an eyewitness who watched a county clerk pull those files and can place that event in the correct time window," he paused. "That's harder to argue away." "What's our position without her?" Ethan said. Reeves looked at him. "Solid, but not airtight." He looked back at Clara. "With her and with the pattern evidence, if we can establish that Pelland used the same method on the Harmon property and any others, we're not just talking about recovering your land. We're talking about a federal fraud case that could dismantle the entire operation." Clara had thought she was past the point of being hit hard by information. She had thought the week of preparing and planning had built her some insulation against the shock of things. She was wrong. "You can do that," she said. "Federal wire fraud conspiracy to commit forgery corruption of a county official." Reeves said it the way doctors said diagnoses, not unkindly, but without softening. If Dern was operating under direction from Peeland, and if Peeland has done this systematically, then yes, this is not a land dispute. This is a criminal enterprise. The kitchen was very still. Ethan spoke first. "How long to build that case? Depends on how many families we can document. How cooperative the other parties are." Reeves looked at Clara. "And how much time you have?" "Jonas Pell gave me a week," she said. "That was 6 days ago." Reeves set his pen down. "Then we moved today." They worked through the afternoon and into the evening. Reeves pulled out his own papers, organized them with the efficiency of a man who worked fast because he had learned that speed and precision were not opposites, and began drafting an emergency filing to the Federal Circuit Court in Helena, requesting a stay of any county proceedings against the Whitfield property pending investigation. Clara wrote letters, 3 of them in the same careful hand she used for the notebook, to the 3 addresses Ethan had found over the previous week, the families in the North County who had lost land to pealand in the past 6 years. The Morrison family. The Tanners. A man named Everett Cole, who was farming on rented land outside of Dunmore because his own was now in Pelland hands. She did not write long letters. She wrote the truth in as few words as it took to say it. My name is Clara Whitfield. My husband Daniel died in March, and the Pelland Company has attempted to take our ranch on the basis of documents he did not sign. I have a federal attorney reviewing the case. If Pealand used the same method against your family, your records may be evidence in a federal fraud investigation. Please write back or come to the Whitfield Ranch on the North Ridge. The fight is not over. She sealed them and handed them to Ethan. He looked at the names on the outside of each one. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, I'll ride them to the post office myself. Don't use Cleary's office, Clara said. I wasn't planning to, he said. He left. Reeves kept writing. Clara made more coffee and stood at the window with her cup and thought about Daniel and about the fact that she was now conducting a federal fraud case from a kitchen table with a cracked leg that she had propped up with a folded piece of leather, and wondered what he would say about that. She thought he would say something quiet and dry and entirely too calm, and then he would pull up a chair and ask what he could do. She missed him with a sharpness that had not dulled. She had been told it would dull. She was still waiting. The response came faster than she expected. Not from the letters, those hadn't had time to arrive anywhere. The response came from Pelland. 2 mornings after Reeves's visit, Clara was in the barn. The door had finally been rehung properly. One of the things Ethan had done on a Tuesday, she hadn't asked him to come when she heard hooves. More than one horse. She came out of the barn and saw 3 riders coming down the trail, and the one in the lead was Deputy Pearson, and the 2 behind him wore no badges, but carried themselves like men who were paid to carry themselves a certain way. Pearson dismounted. Mrs. Whitfield, he said, I'm sorry about this. You don't look sorry, she said. He held out a document. County Court Order. Preliminary injunction authorizing Pelland Land and Commerce to begin survey proceedings on this property pending the resolution of the debt claim. Clara took the paper. Read it. Her chest went cold, and her jaw went tight, and she kept both of these things entirely off her face. This is a county court order, she said. Yes, ma'am. The Pelland case is under review by a federal attorney. Pearson shifted. County court has jurisdiction over. County court has jurisdiction until federal jurisdiction supersedes it, she said. Which it will. My attorney filed a stay request with the Helena Circuit Court yesterday morning. She handed the paper back. Come back when you have something that outranks a federal filing. Pearson looked at the paper she'd handed back. He looked at her. The 2 men behind him had not moved. The survey crew is already scheduled, he said, for Monday. Then they can turn around on Monday, she said. Because if anyone sets foot on this land for Pelland's purposes before a federal judge rules on the stay, I will add obstruction of federal process to the list of things August Reeves is filing in Helena. She looked at Pearson steadily. I imagine that would not be comfortable for a county deputy. Pearson's face was doing something complicated. She could see him running the math, what he'd been paid to do, what it would cost him if she was right. How sure he was that she wasn't. He wasn't sure enough. I'll have to consult with the company's attorneys, he said. You do that, she said. He remounted. The 3 of them rode back down the trail. Clara watched them go and then walked directly inside and wrote down everything that had been said in the notebook word for word, with the time and date at the top. She was still writing when she heard Colt. Ethan came in without knocking. He had been to the post office and was coming back past the ranch when he had seen Pearson's group on the trail. She could tell from his face not worried, but alert in the particular way of a man who has been waiting for the other shoe. "Pearson," he said. "Survey crew Monday," she said. "I told him about the stay. Has it been granted yet?" "Not yet." Ethan sat down. "When does Reeves expect a response from Helena?" "He said 3 to 5 days. Monday is 5 days." "I know." They looked at each other across the kitchen table. "If the stay comes through before Monday," he started. "Then they have to stop," she said. "If it doesn't—" She stopped. She pressed her hands flat on the table and thought it through. "If it doesn't come through by Monday, I need to be standing at the edge of this property at first light with the county order in my hand and my rifle on my back and August Reeves on a horse beside me." "I'll be there too," Ethan said. "You don't have to." "Clara." He said her name with a quietness that stopped her. "I know I don't have to." The kitchen was still again. Outside, a wind moved through the pines. She could hear it the way she had learned to hear everything out here, not as weather, but as presence, the mountain making its own kind of comment on the proceedings. She looked at Ethan Walker and thought about what he had told her that first evening in the doorway, his wife the fever 6 years alone on the North Ridge. She had filed it away carefully, the way she filed things that mattered not to use, but just to carry. "All right," she said. Sunday came and went without word from Helena. Clara spent it working the garden, the barn, the south fence that needed 2 new rails. Physical work had always been where her thinking happened best, where the noise in her head settled into something she could organize. She turned soil and drove nails, and by Sunday evening, she had something that felt less like anxiety and more like a decision. She was not leaving this land under any circumstances. That was not new, she had known it since March, but it had shifted somehow into something harder and more specific. She was not leaving and she was not losing, and whatever happened Monday morning was not the end. It was a point in the middle of a longer fight, and she knew the shape of the fight now, which was something she had not known 6 days ago. That mattered. Reeves had ridden back to his hotel in town, but he left a copy of the stay filing with Clara and had written at the bottom of it in his precise handwriting, "If they come Monday, show them this." A filed stay has legal weight even before it is formally granted. Any action taken against the property while a federal filing is pending is legally actionable. She had read it 4 times. She had it memorized. Monday came up clear and hot, the sky an early pale blue above the mountains. Clara was dressed and at the gate before sunup. Ethan was already there. He was leaning against the fence post she had watched him repair on the 2nd week of knowing him, his hat down against the early light, a rifle across his arm, not raised, not threatening, just present the way a man carries a rifle when he wants its presence to do the communicating. She walked down and stood beside him. "You sleep," he said. "Some," she said. "You, some." He looked down the trail. "They'll come from the South Road." "I know." They stood together in the early morning light and waited. It was not a comfortable silence, and it was not an uncomfortable one. It was the silence of 2 people who have passed through enough together in a short time that silence is no longer a question. The survey crew arrived at 20 past 7. 3 men with equipment and a wagon, and behind them Pearson, and behind Pearson a 4th man in town clothes who had the look of a peelant attorney. Clara stepped forward to the gate. She held up the copy of the federal filing. "Federal Circuit Court," she said. "Stay request filed Friday morning. Any survey activity on this property constitutes interference with an active federal proceeding." The attorney in town clothes dismounted. He was young, she noticed younger than Reeves by 10 years. He had the slightly too confident look of someone who hadn't lost enough cases yet. "A filed request is not a granted stay," he said. "A filed federal request carries legal weight, and you know it," Clara said. "You want to order that survey crew onto this land this morning. I need you to say out loud in front of Deputy Pearson and these men and God and everyone that you are prepared to answer for that in federal court when the stay is granted." The attorney looked at the document in her hand. He looked at Ethan, who had not moved from the fence post and had not raised the rifle and had not said a single word. He looked at Pearson. "Deputy," he said. "Do you have—" "I have a county order," Pearson said. He did not sound happy about it. "She has a federal filing." He paused. "I'm not making that call." The attorney's jaw tightened. The survey crew had not moved from their wagon. They were looking at each other with the expressions of men who were paid to survey land, not to resolve jurisdictional disputes between county courts and federal circuits, and who were very aware that whichever side was wrong today was going to make life difficult in ways they had not agreed to. "We'll consult with the company," the attorney said finally. "You do that," Clara said. "And when you're consulting, you might want to mention that I have a letter identifying the county clerk who pulled my husband's files before the forgeries were filed." She let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. "August Reeves has the original." The attorney went very still. It was a small thing, the stilling. But Clara had been watching people's faces for months now with the specific attention of a woman whose survival depended on reading the difference between what was shown and what was felt, and what she saw in that attorney's face in the moment after she mentioned Dern was not confusion. It was recognition. He knew the name. "Good morning," she said and stepped back from the gate. The survey crew turned the wagon around. The attorney remounted without another word. Pearson looked at Clara for a moment with an expression she could not entirely read, something between professional respect and personal unease, and then tipped his hat and followed the others down the trail. Clara waited until they were gone. Then she turned around and sat down on the ground, right there, her back against the fence post, and put her face in her hands. Not crying, not quite, just pressing her palms against her closed eyes and breathing. She felt Ethan crouch down beside her. He didn't say anything. He didn't put a hand on her shoulder or tell her it was all right. He just crouched there, which was exactly the right thing. And after a minute, Clara lowered her hands and looked up at the sky. "That attorney knew the name," she said. "I saw," Ethan said. "Which means it goes higher than Dern. Dern wasn't acting alone. Peelin's own legal team knew what Dern was doing," Ethan said. "Or directed it." Clara stood up. She brushed the dirt from her trousers with a few short, decisive motions. "I need to wire Reeves right now," she said. "Before that attorney gets back to Jonas Pell and they start moving things they don't want found." "There's a telegraph office in Millview," Ethan said. "Not Dunmore. Millview's 20 miles, but Cleary doesn't know the operator there." "Then we ride to Millview," she said. They were saddled and moving within 10 minutes. The ride to Millview was fast and mostly silent, the kind of riding where you were thinking too hard to talk. Clara spent the first half of it running through what she had seen on that attorney's face, the recognition, the tiny stillness, the way his next words had been slower than the ones before, like a man recalculating. She spent the second half composing what she would say to Reeves. The Millview telegraph office was run by a teenage boy who looked at them with the mild curiosity of someone who saw very little unusual traffic and therefore found everything interesting. Clara wrote the wire to Reeves herself, standing at the counter. Attorney on scene recognized Dern name. Reaction suggests Peeland legal team had knowledge or gave direction. Survey crew turned back. Need you to push Helena on stay timeline and request preservation order on any Peeland document records. Time is critical. CW. She counted the words paid and watched the boy tap it out. Then she turned to Ethan and said, "Where are the Harmons?" He looked at her. "Margaret's in Dunmore." "Why?" "Because if Peeland knows I have the Dern connection, Margaret is the one who gave it to me. And if they figure that out—" She stopped. "Margaret is 62 years old, and she lives alone on the east side of town, and she handed me a letter that could take down their entire operation." Ethan was already moving toward the horses. Margaret Harmon answered the door in her work clothes with flour on her hands, which meant she had not been sitting around worrying, which was exactly what Clara would have expected from her. She looked at the two of them on her step and said, "What happened?" It was not a question. Clara told her quickly, the survey crew, the attorney, the recognition of Dern's name. Margaret listened. When Clara finished, Margaret wiped her hands on her apron and turned back inside, and said over her shoulder, "Come in." In the kitchen, she opened a drawer beside the stove and pulled out a folded envelope. "I made a copy of Alice Pratt's letter," she said, "the day after I gave you the original." She held it out to Ethan. "In case they came for mine." Ethan took it. He looked at Margaret with something that was not quite surprise, because the longer Clara knew him, the more she understood that he was not easily surprised, but was something. "You made a copy before you gave the original," he said. "I've been dealing with powerful men for 60 years, Margaret said. "I always keep a copy." Clara looked at this woman, at the flour on her hands, and the small rented kitchen, and the drawer beside the stove where she kept her ammunition organized and ready, and felt something expand in her chest that she didn't have a word for. Not quite love. Not quite sorrow. Something that lived at the intersection of the two. "You need to leave your house for a few days," Clara said. Margaret looked at her. "If Palin connects you to the letter, and they will eventually, this is the first place they'll come," Clara said. "Not with violence. With pressure. A visit. An offer. The kind that doesn't sound like a threat until later." "I'm not afraid of Jonas Pell," Margaret said flatly. "I know you're not. That's not why I'm asking." Clara met her eyes. "I'm asking because I need you available when this gets to court. I need you intact and unintimidated and ready to testify about everything in that box of yours." A pause. "You can stay at the ranch. I have a second room." Margaret Harmon looked at Clara for a long moment. She looked at Ethan. She looked at the flour on her hands. "I've been in this house since Reg died," she said, quietly. The hardness underneath her voice went somewhere softer for just a moment. "I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of leaving." "This isn't leaving," Clara said. "This is choosing the ground." Margaret looked at her for another moment. Then she said, "Give me an hour to pack a bag." Bowed. The wire from Reeves came back that evening, relayed from Millview. Clara read it at Margaret's table, while Margaret finished packing the wooden box. "Preservation order request filed. Helena expects ruling on stay within 48 hours. Your description of attorney's reaction is significant. I need you to document exactly what you saw, time-stamped, signed in preparation for deposition. Also, I heard back from a contact in Oregon. Alice Pratt is willing to travel. She said, and I am quoting directly, 'I should have spoken sooner. I won't wait any longer.' She'll be in Montana within 10 days. Reeves." Clara read it twice. Then she folded it and pressed it to her chest for a moment, not to contain it, but to feel the weight of it. Alice Pratt in Oregon, who had written a letter because she had finally stopped being afraid. Margaret Harmon, packing a wooden box in the next room. Ethan Walker outside securing the horses. 3 people she had not known 2 months ago. All of them moving toward the same point because something had finally been said out loud that made moving toward it possible. She unfolded the wire and wrote the date and time at the top in her notebook, then copied Reeves's message word for word beneath it. Then she wrote Alice Pratt. 10 days. She was still sitting there when Ethan came back in. He looked at her face and knew before she handed him the wire. He read it. He set it down. 10 days, he said. 10 days, she said. He sat down across from her at the table, and they looked at each other in the particular way that had become their specific language. Not a conversation about what was said, but about what was underneath it, about what was being built here in the space between a borrowed kitchen table and a dying ranch house on a Montana mountain. "I heard back from Everett Cole," Ethan said. He reached into his coat and brought out a letter handwritten short. "He'll come. He's been waiting for someone to give him a reason." And the Morrisons. The Tanners. Morrison wrote back this morning. His wife is the one who kept their records. She never threw anything away. She has the original land office filings from before Palin came for them. He paused. The Tanners haven't written back. "They will," Clara said. She believed it. The door opened and Margaret came in with the wooden box under one arm and a travel bag in the other hand, and set both down with the efficiency of a woman who had made decisions and was done reconsidering them. "I want to testify," Margaret said. She was looking at both of them. "When this goes to court, whatever Reeves needs from me, I'll give it. I want to stand in that room and say out loud what was done to my husband's name." Her voice had gone to that place again, the place under the hardness where the grief lived alongside the fury and had made its peace with being permanent. Reginald Harmon worked that land for 30 years. He deserves better than a forged signature on a lie. "He'll have it," Clara said. It was the same voice she used for facts. Then the wire from Helena arrived. The boy from Millview had ridden out himself, which meant it was urgent, which meant Reeves had flagged it that way. He handed it to Clara at the door of Margaret's house, and she read it standing there in the fading evening light. "Stay granted. Federal jurisdiction established over Whitfield property effective immediately. Any county proceedings suspended. Additionally, Helena Contact advises Pelland attorney has filed motion to dismiss your stay on grounds that the federal filing was premature. Hearing scheduled in 9 days. You will need to appear. Bring everything. Reeves 9 days, Alice Pratt in 10 days. Alice. 1 day between the witness they needed most and the hearing that would determine whether this case was a trial or a dismissal. Clara folded the wire. She looked at Ethan. 9 days, she said. His face did not change, but something behind it did a tightening, a gathering of everything that was usually held close. Then we have 9 days, he said. We need Alice Pratt in that courtroom. I know. We need the Morrison records. I'll ride to Morrison tomorrow. We need Everett Cole's testimony. He said he'd come. And we need... She stopped. She pressed her hand flat on the wire. We need the Tanner family. I'll find them. Ethan. She said his name with the particular weight she had been slowly learning to give it, not a question, not a direction. Something more like a door being opened. If this goes wrong in that courtroom... It won't, he said. You don't know, Clara. He leaned forward. His voice was low and exact and carried in it all the particular weight of a man who chose his words so carefully that when he committed to them, they meant something absolute. I have watched a company take land from people who couldn't fight back. I watched it happen to Harmon. I didn't do anything. I have been carrying that for 2 years. He paused. I am not walking away from this. Not in 9 days. Not in 9 years. Whatever it takes. She looked at him across the table in Margaret Harmon's borrowed kitchen in the last of the evening light. She thought, this is not what I expected from the man who showed up with a fence post and no explanation. She thought, but maybe that was exactly what it was from the very beginning. Maybe fixing a fence is exactly what it looks like when a man decides he is done walking away from things that matter. She didn't say any of that. What she said was, then let's get to work. And they did. Margaret made coffee. Clara opened the notebook. Ethan laid out every piece of evidence on the table, and they went through it together in the order a court would see it, building the argument piece by piece. The real signatures, the forged ones, the land office records, the timeline, Dern's name, Alice Pratt's letter, the pattern across 3 families, the attorney's face when Clara had said the name out loud. They worked until the lamp needed filling twice. Outside, the Montana summer dark was total, and the mountain was absolutely still. Inside, the table was covered in papers, and the coffee cups had been refilled until neither of them could taste it anymore, and Clara's handwriting in the notebook had gotten smaller and more compressed the way it always did when she was deep in something, pressing more onto each page, because there was so much that needed to be said. At some point, Margaret had fallen asleep in the chair by the door, her chin on her chest, the wooden box beside her feet like a faithful dog. Clara looked at her. Then she looked at Ethan, who was reading the Morrison letter for the 3rd time with the focused expression of a man extracting every possible piece of value from a document. She thought about Daniel, about sitting beside him on the 4th night when his breathing had changed, about the way he had taken her hand and told her she would be all right. She had not believed him then. She was beginning to now. Not because things were easier, because she understood finally what he had meant. Not nothing bad will happen. Not you won't struggle. He had meant you won't break. He had meant I know you, and I know what you're made of, and whatever comes, you will still be standing. She picked up the pen. She wrote at the top of the new page, 9 days. Everything we have. Everything it takes. Then she kept writing. The 9 days moved, the way time moves when something is coming that cannot be stopped fast in the living of it, each hour swallowed by the next, before you could account for where it went, but heavy with a weight that made the body feel every minute. Ethan rode to the Morrison farm on Tuesday and came back with Eleanor Morrison herself, a woman of 54 with iron gray hair and a canvas satchel she had not let go of since she packed it, which contained 30 years of her husband's meticulous land records, organized by date and filed in labeled sleeves the way a schoolteacher organized lesson plans. She had been keeping them, she told Clara, because she had never believed the fight was over. She had just been waiting for someone to tell her it wasn't. She slept in the front room and was up before Clara each morning, already at the table with her records spread out cross-referencing dates with the quiet ferocity of a woman who had been sitting on this particular fury for a very long time. Everett Cole arrived Wednesday afternoon on a horse that had seen better years and with a jaw set so hard it looked like it had been carved there. He was a man of about 60 who said very little and observed everything. And when Clara explained the full scope of what Reeves was building, the pattern, the multiple families, the Dern connection, the potential federal fraud charge, he sat with his hat in his hands for a moment and then looked up and said simply, "Tell me what you need from me," Clara told him. He nodded once and did not need to be told again. The Tanners wrote back on Thursday. Their letter was brief, one paragraph in a shaking hand, the kind of handwriting that belonged to someone who had written very little since the thing that broke them. They were in Billings. They had records. They would come if someone could tell them it would matter. Clara wrote back herself by hand the same day. She told them it would matter. She sealed the letter and gave it to Ethan, and he wrote it to Millview himself. The Whitfield Ranch had become something it had not been since before Daniel died. Full, not of noise exactly, but of presence. Eleanor at the table. Everett checking the south fence out of an old rancher's habit he couldn't suppress even as a guest. Margaret Harmon moving through the kitchen with the efficiency of a woman who had decided that if she was going to be somewhere, she was going to be useful in it. Clara moved through all of it and held it together the way she held everything quietly with her hands. But at night, when the house was still and the lamp was down, and she was lying on the floor beside the cold fireplace, the way she had been sleeping since March, she allowed herself to feel how heavy it was. Not the case, not the hearing. The weight of all these people who had driven or ridden to her broken ranch house on a Montana mountain because she had written them a letter that told the truth. She had not asked to carry that, but she was carrying it, and she was not going to put it down. Bantal. Friday brought Reeves back, and he brought with him a change in the shape of things. He sat at the kitchen table, with Eleanor's records on his left, the Pillen documents in the center, and his own briefcase open on his right, and he went through everything with the focused precision of a man running out of time, but refusing to let that fact touch the quality of his work. Then he looked up at Clara. "I need to tell you something about the hearing," he said. "And I need you to hear it without deciding anything until I'm finished." "All right," she said. Palin's motion to dismiss argues that the federal stay was premature because the original debt claim is a county matter and the federal court has no standing to supersede it. He paused. "Their attorney, the young one you described his name, is Carter Hobbs. I know him. He's better than he looked on your porch. He's been coached by someone with more experience, and he's going to argue this hard. What does he have? He has the county order. He has the original Pelin documents, the forged ones, and he's going to argue that absent definitive proof of forgery, those documents represent a valid legal debt." Reeves set his pen down. "He's also going to argue that Margaret Harmon's letter is hearsay. Alice Pratt wrote it, but is not present to testify." The room went quiet. Clara felt Margaret's stillness from across the table. "Alice Pratt arrives in 8 days," Clara said. "The hearing is in 8 days. I know. Then she'll be there." "I know you believe that," Reeves said carefully. But I need to build the case without relying on her arrival as the cornerstone. Because if her train is late or she changes her mind or something prevents, she won't change her mind, Margaret said. It was the first time she had spoken since Reeves started. Her voice was quiet and absolute. I know what it costs a woman to write a letter like that. You don't write it unless you're done with the alternative. Reeves looked at her for a moment. He had the particular expression of a lawyer who has just been told something by someone who knows things he doesn't. All right, he said. Then here is what I'm building with or without her as a variable. He looked back at Clara. I'm going to argue pattern. 3 families, same method, same timing, same company. I'm going to show the court that this is not one disputed debt, it is a systematic operation. The Dern connection proves that the method required internal access to county records. The handwriting comparison, which I'm bringing a document examiner from Billings to perform before the hearing, establishes that the signatures are forged. He paused. And your testimony, Clara, establishes what kind of man Daniel Whitfield was, and what he would and would not have signed. Clara was very still. My testimony, she said. You're the one who knew him. You're the one who can speak to his character, his practices, his habits with documents. Reeves looked at her steadily. I won't put you up there unless you want to go. But I think you're the best witness this case has, because you are the only person in that courtroom who loved him. The kitchen was absolutely silent. Outside, Everett Cole was moving around the barn, his footsteps steady and deliberate in the dirt. Clara thought about Daniel, about the way he had sat at this same table, in that same chair, reading every document he ever signed before he put his name to it. She thought about his handwriting, the D that leaned slightly left, the loop that never closed. She thought about standing in front of a federal judge and telling the truth about her husband. I'll testify, she said. Saturday, the document examiner arrived from Billings. His name was Clarence Webb, and he was 60 years old and had spent 30 of those years working for the territorial government, examining documents in land disputes, fraud cases, and probate conflicts. He wore wire-rimmed glasses and spoke in short, precise sentences and looked at the forged Pellin documents and the original county land office records for approximately 40 minutes in complete silence before he set everything down and took off his glasses and cleaned them on his shirt. These are not the same hand, he said. You're certain, Reeves said. I have been doing this since before you were practicing law, Mr. Reeves. He picked up the county records. This man wrote with a slight leftward pressure, dominant in the downstrokes. His letter D has a consistent characteristic. The upper loop does not close. It is a habit. People do not shed habits in their signatures. He set the records down and picked up the Pellin document. Whoever signed this knew the habit existed and attempted to reproduce it. They came close. They did not succeed. Can you say that under oath? Reeves said. I have said considerably less comfortable things under oath on considerably less solid ground, Webb said. Yes. Clara had been standing in the doorway. She made herself breathe. One more piece of something that had started as nothing. A cold floor, a rifle, a garden in a ruined yard, and had become this. A table full of evidence. A room full of people who had chosen to show up. She went outside and stood in the summer heat and pressed her hands together and said very quietly to no one she could see, Daniel, you're going to be all right. She wasn't sure if she was talking to him or borrowing his words for herself. Maybe both. Sunday brought the one thing she had not planned for. She was in the barn when she heard a horse she didn't recognize, a different gait too fast for someone paying a courtesy call. She came out and saw a young man she didn't know dismounting at the gate, and behind him, tied to the saddle, was a second horse, and in the second horse's saddlebag was a letter wrapped in oilcloth. He held it out to her. For Mrs. Whitfield, he said, from Jonas Peel. She took it without touching it any more than necessary, which was irrational, and she knew it, but some instincts were older than reason. She brought it inside. Ethan was at the table. Reeves was in the front room with Eleanor's records. She set the letter on the table and opened it. It was one page. The handwriting was confident, and even the hand of a man who wrote a great deal. Mrs. Whitfield, I am informed that you have assembled what you believe to be a compelling case for the federal hearing. I would encourage you before that hearing takes place to consider the following. I have operated in this territory for 11 years. I have relationships with every significant landholder, every county official, and every territorial judge in a 300-mile radius. What you are attempting is not merely a legal challenge. It is a declaration of war against an institution. I do not wish you harm. I wish you clarity. The offer I made on your porch stands. Take it. Whatever you believe you have found, I promise you it will not be enough. J. Pell. Clara read it twice. Then she set it down and looked at it. He's scared, Ethan said. He's warning me, she said. Scared men give warnings, Ethan said. Confident men don't bother. She looked up at him. He was right, and they both knew it, and neither of them needed to say it again. She picked up the letter and walked to the fireplace and set it on the grate and touched a match to it and watched it go. I want that documented, Reeves said from the doorway. He had heard. The content and the burning of it. Write it down now, word for word, everything you can remember. Clara went to the notebook. She wrote down every word. Ted. Monday. 7 days to the hearing. Alice Pratt's train was on schedule, according to the wire Reeves sent to the Oregon station. She would arrive in Billings in 6 days. Reeves had arranged for her to be met and brought directly to Dunmore. One day before the hearing, Clara woke that morning and lay still for a moment, and took the shape of everything in her mind. Webb, Eleanor, Everett, Margaret Reeves, Pratt. The hearing in 7 days, and felt for the first time not the weight of it, but the structure. The architecture of something that had been built piece by piece, document by document, letter by letter, from the broken material of lives that Peeland had believed could be permanently dismantled. She got up. She made coffee for 7 people, and then Jonas Pell made his second mistake. He made it at 9 in the morning when Deputy Pearson arrived at the gate with 2 men from the county sheriff's office and a new document, not a survey order this time, but a writ, claiming that Clara Whitfield had fraudulently misrepresented the nature of the federal filing to obstruct a legitimate county proceeding. Clara read the writ on the porch while the 3 men waited. Then she went inside and handed it to Reeves. Reeves read it once. His expression did not change, but something in his posture went tighter. He's trying to get you arrested, Reeves said, quietly, for her ears only. On what grounds? Obstruction, fraudulent misrepresentation of a legal filing. Reeves set the writ down. It's manufactured. There is no substance to it. But if they take you into county custody before the federal hearing, they can't, Clara said. Can they? The federal stay covers the property, Reeves said. Not necessarily you personally. He was thinking fast. She could see it, the rapid inward movement of a man who was revising his calculations in real time. But if they arrest you on a county charge before the hearing, I can file a habeas petition to the circuit court, and the judge who granted the stay will not be pleased. He paused. Pell knows that, which means this is not about arresting you. This is about intimidation. He wants you to see that he can still reach inside the stay and touch you. He wants me to take the offer, Clara said. Yes. She went back to the door. Pearson was still there, patient and uncomfortable in equal measure. Deputy, she said, has the sheriff signed this writ personally? Pearson looked at the document. It bears the county seal. Has Sheriff Alderman signed it personally? She said. Because the last I heard, Alderman has been in Billings since Thursday visiting his daughter. And county writs require his personal signature. She looked at the writ in Pearson's hand. Not a stamp. His signature. Pearson looked at the writ again. He looked at the 2 men beside him. The 2 men looked at the writ. I'll need to verify, Pearson said. You do that, Clara said. And deputy, when you're verifying, you might mention to whoever gave you that document that August Reeves is filing a motion this afternoon, requesting that the circuit court extend its jurisdiction to include any county proceedings initiated against me personally while the federal case is pending. She paused. I imagine that'll be an interesting conversation. Pearson looked at her for a long moment. Then he folded the writ and put it in his coat pocket and rode away without another word. Clara came back inside and closed the door and leaned against it. Margaret was watching her from the kitchen doorway. The stamp wasn't his signature, Margaret said. It was not a question. I don't actually know that, Clara said. I guessed. Margaret stared at her. Then she made a sound that was unmistakably a laugh. Short and hard and genuine, the kind that comes out when something is so absurd and so true at the same time that the body doesn't know what else to do with it. Clara felt the corner of her own mouth pull upward. She pushed off the door and walked back to the table. Reeves did file the motion, and 2 hours later, something happened that none of them had expected. The circuit court granted it. Not the full extension, a limited protective order specific to Clara Whitfield, preventing any county-level arrest or detainment proceedings against her while the federal case was active. The judge who signed it added 3 words in the margin of the order which Reeves read aloud when the wire came and jurisdiction is established. Eleanor Morrison made a sound like she had been holding her breath for 2 years. Everett Cole stood up from the table and walked to the window and stood there with his back to the room and his hand on the sill. And Clara understood that he was not looking out the window. He was not looking at anything. He was just standing somewhere for a moment while something that had been held for a very long time came loose. She left him alone. She went outside and found Ethan at the fence, because Ethan was always doing something with his hands when he needed to think, and she stood beside him and told him what the wire said. He finished the nail he was driving. Set the hammer down. 3 words, he said. 3 words, she said. He turned to look at her. They were close. The practical proximity of people who had been working in the same space for days, but also something beyond the practical, some distance that had been closing incrementally since the morning she had pointed a rifle at him from her porch and he had raised his hands and not moved. You're not done yet, he said. I know. The hearing is in 6 days. Pratt arrives in 5. I know that too. And Pell is going to come at this harder now that the protective order went through. He looked at her steadily. He's going to come at it from a direction you haven't thought of yet. That's how men like him operate. They probe until they find something you haven't defended. What haven't I defended? She said. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Me, he said. She looked at him. The lease agreement, he said. The water rights. The fact that I've been on this property helping build your case for 3 weeks. He held her gaze. Pell's attorneys are going to argue in that courtroom that the federal case was manufactured by a wealthy neighbor with a financial interest in the property, that I'm the one driving this, that you're not a widow defending her land, you're a puppet in someone else's play. The word landed like a stone. Clara stared at him. Not because she thought he was wrong, because she had not seen it coming. And not seeing something coming was the one thing she did not forgive herself for. He'll try to make it about you, she said. He'll try to make it about me, Ethan said. To make it not about him. She turned and looked at the house. At the garden along the south wall. At the 9 years of her and Daniel's life, embedded in every plank and post of that structure, including the broken ones she hadn't had time to fix yet. Then you can't be at the hearing, she said. Ethan said nothing. If you walk into that courtroom, Hobbs will build his entire argument around you, she said. He'll put your lease agreement on the table and argue that you have financial interest in this land and that every piece of evidence was gathered under your influence. She turned back to him. You can't be there. He looked at her for a long moment. She could see what it cost him, the discipline of it. The particular difficulty of a man who had decided not to walk away from things that mattered, being asked to walk away from the thing that mattered most. You'll go in alone, he said. I'll go in with Reeves, with Eleanor and Everett and Margaret, with Webb's examination and Alice Pratt's testimony and 30 years of the Morrisons' records. She held his gaze. "I don't need you in that room to fight this fight. That's the point." "I know," he said, quietly. "That's not what this is about." She understood. She understood exactly. "I know what it's about," she said just as quietly. "But this is how we win. And winning is what matters." He picked up the hammer. He drove another nail. She went back inside. The Tanners arrived Tuesday evening, a man and his wife, both in their late 50s, both wearing the particular expression of people who have spent a long time being certain that nothing would ever come of speaking up. Their name was Carl and Ruth Tanner, and they had lost their land 18 months ago. And Ruth Tanner was the one who did the talking, because Carl Tanner had gone somewhere quiet inside himself when it happened, and had not entirely come back. But he had come here. That counted for something. Ruth sat down at Clara's kitchen table, now permanently crowded with cups and papers and the accumulated evidence of 4 families, and looked at everything spread across it, and then looked at Clara. "Is this real?" she said, not skeptical, just honest. A woman who had been disappointed before and needed to know if this time was different before she let herself believe it. "It's real," Clara said. Ruth Tanner looked at her for a long moment. Whatever she was reading in Clara's face, she found what she was looking for. "Carl," she said, "bring the box." He brought it. It was smaller than Margaret's, a tin box, dented the kind used for biscuits. Inside were land office receipts, a cancelled deed, and 3 letters Carl had written to the county court that had gone unanswered. Unanswered, but dated. Documented. Evidence of a man who had tried every legitimate channel and been ignored. Reeves took the letters from Ruth Tanner's hands with the careful attention of someone receiving something valuable, which was exactly what they were. "These go in," he said. "Proof that county channels were unavailable to you. That's not just pattern evidence, that's evidence of systemic denial of legal process." Ruth Tanner's eyes were bright. "So it matters." "It matters considerably," Reeves said. She looked at Carl. He was looking at the table, at the spread of papers, at the evidence of 4 families assembled in one place for the first time, and his expression was doing something complicated and slow, the way a face changes when a thing that has been sealed for a long time is finally let out into the air. He reached out and put his hand over Ruth's on the table. She turned her palm up and held it. Clara looked away. She went to the window and stood there in the dark and thought about what Reeves was building, not just a case, but a record. A record that said these people existed, and they fought, and they were right. And the fact that powerful men ignored them for a long time did not make them less right. It made the record more necessary. She thought about Daniel again, about the notebook he had given her, about the fact that everything she had written in it since March had been, without her realizing it, exactly this, a record of what happened and what she knew and what she needed and what she was going to do. She went back to the table. She sat down between Margaret and Ruth Tanner and opened the notebook to the last page of notes. "All right," she said. "Let's go through everything one more time, in the order Reeves will present it. Because in 5 days we walk into that courtroom and we tell the truth, and we are going to do it so clearly and so completely that there is no version of events in which Jonas Pell walks out of there the same man he walked in." Nobody argued. They worked through the night, and outside the Whitfield Ranch, the Montana summer dark was deep, and the stars were absolute, and the garden along the south wall was silver in the moonlight, growing steadily the way things grow when someone refuses to stop tending them. Alice Pratt arrived on a Wednesday afternoon one day before the hearing on a train that was 40 minutes late and that Clara had been tracking by wire since it left Billings. She was smaller than Clara had imagined. 60 years old, maybe a little more, with white hair and the careful movements of a woman who had been carrying guilt for so long. It had changed the way she held her body slightly forward, like she was perpetually on the verge of saying something she had been holding back. She stepped off the train with a single bag and looked around the Millview platform until her eyes found Clara, and then she walked straight to her without hesitation. "Mrs. Whitfield," she said. "Mrs. Pratt?" Clara took her hand. Thank you for coming." Alice Pratt looked at her for a moment, with the direct, undefended gaze of a woman who had made a decision and was done second-guessing it. "I should have come years ago," she said. "I should have spoken when it would have helped the Harmons. I didn't, and I have to live with that." She pressed Clara's hand once firmly. "I won't make the same mistake twice." They rode back to the ranch. Alice Pratt sat straight in the saddle despite the long journey, and did not complain about the road or the heat or the 40-minute delay, and Clara understood that this was a woman who had crossed a much larger distance than Oregon to Montana to be here. She had crossed whatever it cost to stop being afraid. Reeves met them at the gate. He shook Alice Pratt's hand with the focused courtesy of a man who understood exactly what she represented. He took her inside and spent 2 hours going over her testimony, what she had seen, when she had seen it, how she would describe it under oath, what Hobbs would likely ask her on cross-examination, and how to answer without flinching. Clara stayed in the kitchen. She could hear their voices through the wall, Reeves's methodical patient. Alice Pratt's measured and clear, growing steadier as the session went on, like a person warming into something they had been cold about for too long. Margaret sat across from Clara and did not speak, which was the right thing. The notebook was open on the table. Clara looked at the last entry she had written the night before, after everyone had finally gone to sleep. It was not a list of evidence or a timeline or a legal strategy. It was a single line. "Tomorrow we tell the truth in front of people who have the power to do something about it." She closed the notebook. The morning of the hearing, Clara was dressed before first light. She had ironed her best dress the night before and hung it on the back of the door, and she put it on in the dark without a lamp, because she did not want to wake Margaret, who had finally fallen into a real sleep some time past midnight. She did her hair by feel, pinned it the way she had always pinned it when something important was happening, and then stood in the dark kitchen for a moment with both hands flat on the table. "You're going to be all right, Clara," she said. She said it quietly. She said it like she meant it, because she did. The others came awake one by one. Margaret first, then Eleanor, then Ruth Tanner, who shook Carl gently, and he sat up from the front room floor, where he had slept with the particular alertness of someone who had not been deeply asleep. Everett Cole came in from the barn where he had insisted on staying, though Clara had offered him the second room, because he was the kind of man who did not take rooms from women who needed them. Reeves arrived at 7, which was earlier than she had expected, and his face when he came through the door told her something had happened. "The hearing is moved," he said. The room went tight. "Moved to when?" Clara said. "Same day, 2 hours earlier." He set his briefcase on the table. "Hobbs filed a motion last night to expedite. The judge granted it, which I did not expect." He looked at Clara. "We need to leave in 30 minutes. "Why would the judge move it earlier?" Eleanor Morrison said. "I don't know yet," Reeves said, "and I don't like not knowing." He was already opening the briefcase, reorganizing papers with the rapid precision of a man revising a plan in real time. "But it doesn't change what we have. It changes when we say it." Clara looked at the room at Margaret already tying her hat at Ruth Tanner, squeezing Carl's arm at Everett Cole, pulling on his coat, with the deliberate calm of a man who had decided the night before that he was not going to be rattled by anything that happened today. Alice Pratt came out of the front room, dressed and steady. "Are we ready?" she said. "We're ready," Clara said. The Federal Circuit courtroom in Dunmore was not a grand building. It was a converted meeting hall at the end of the main street, with a raised platform for the judge, and 2 long tables facing it, and benches for observers that had been filled by the time Clara's group arrived with more people than she had expected. She saw the Paland contingent, immediately Jonas Pell in the front row on the right, dressed in the kind of clothing that announced money the same way his buggy had, with 3 men in suits arrayed around him that she did not recognize. Carter Hobbs, the young attorney, was already at the plaintiff's table, arranging papers with the quick efficiency of someone who wanted to appear more settled than he was. She saw other faces she recognized. Mrs. Alcott from the post office, which surprised her. 2 men from the feed store. The school teacher, Miss Farron. Ordinary people, who had come to watch a woman fight a company for her dead husband's land, the way ordinary people always came to watch things that felt like they mattered. And in the back row, his hat in his hands, sitting quietly apart from everyone, was Ethan Walker. He had said he would not come. He had come anyway. Clara looked at him across the room, and he looked at her, and he gave the same short nod he had given on the very first Thursday morning when he walked to her gate with a leather satchel full of land office documents, and she understood that he had come not to participate, but to be present, which was a different thing, and the right thing. She sat down. Reeves leaned toward her. "He's here," he said quietly. "I see him. Hobbs will see him too." "I know." She straightened her papers. "Let him." End. The judge was a man named Aldous Crane Circuit Court, who had the face of someone who had seen considerable human dishonesty over a long career and had developed an impatience with it that he did not bother to conceal. He came in, looked at both tables, and said without preamble, "We're here on a motion to dismiss a federal stay filed in the matter of Whitfield versus Pelland Land and Commerce Company. Mr. Hobbs, your motion. Let's hear it." Hobbs stood. He was composed, more composed than he had been on Clara's porch, and Reeves had been right that he had been coached because the argument he made was cleaner and more specific than the one a 20-something attorney constructs alone. He argued that the federal stay was procedurally premature, that the underlying debt claim was a county matter that the federal court had exceeded its jurisdictional scope, and that absent credible evidence of federal crime, the case should be remanded to county proceedings immediately. He was good. Clara watched the judge's face and could not read it. Then Hobbs said something that she had not expected. "Furthermore, Your Honor, we wish to bring to the court's attention the presence in this proceeding of one Ethan Walker, owner of the Walker Ranch on the North Ridge, who holds an active lease agreement with the property in question, giving him direct financial interest in the outcome of this case." Hobbs paused for effect. "The evidence presented by Mrs. Whitfield's counsel has been gathered substantially with Mr. Walker's assistance and resources. We submit that this represents a compromised evidentiary foundation and request that the court weigh it accordingly." Crane looked up. He looked at the back of the room. Ethan Walker did not move. The judge looked back at the plaintiff's table. "Mr. Reeves?" Reeves stood. He had the expression of a man who had been expecting this and had prepared for it so thoroughly that when it arrived, it felt like a formality. "Your Honor, the lease agreement between Mrs. Whitfield and Mr. Walker is a documented mutual commercial arrangement involving water rights access. It is not a financial interest in the property. More to the point, the evidentiary foundation of this case does not rest on Mr. Walker." He paused. "It rests on documents, on handwriting examination, on the testimony of 4 families, and on an eyewitness who watched a county clerk pull the Whitfield land files under circumstances that directly enabled a forgery." He picked up a single paper from the table. "I would like to call our first witness." Chapter 7. Clarence Webb testified for 20 minutes. He put the documents side by side on the exhibit table, put his glasses on, and told the court in the flat authoritative language of a man who had done this 30 times what he saw in the Whitfield signatures. The D with the unclosed loop. The T crossing that was wrong. The leftward pressure in the downstroke that the forger had attempted and failed to fully replicate. Hobbs cross-examined him for 12 minutes. Webb answered every question with the unruffled patience of someone who had been cross-examined by attorneys far more experienced than Carter Hobbs, and had found it on the whole a mild inconvenience. When Hobbs sat down, the judge made a note. Reeves called Eleanor Morrison. Eleanor walked to the stand with her canvas satchel and set it on her knee and testified to 30 years of her husband's land records, to the pattern of Pelland's approach to the identical method used against her family. She spoke in the careful, organized language of a schoolteacher and did not look at Jonas Pell once, which Clara suspected cost her considerably. Hobbs tried to argue that the Morrison case was a separate matter. Crane cut him off. "The pattern is relevant, Mr. Hobbs. Move on." Everett Cole testified next. He said almost nothing beyond the facts: his land, the pill and documents, the county clerk who had been unhelpful, the letters that had gone unanswered. But the way he said the facts carried the accumulated weight of a man who had been holding them for years, and the courtroom was very quiet while he spoke. Hobbs declined to cross-examine Everett Cole. Ruth Tanner testified about the letters Carl had written. Carl sat in the third bench and kept his hands on his knees and did not look away from his wife's face the entire time she spoke. Then Reeves said, "Your Honor, I'd like to call Alice Pratt." Jim. The room shifted when Alice Pratt walked to the stand. Clara felt it, the particular tension of people who understood that something was happening that mattered, who were not sure yet how much. Alice Pratt sat down, folded her hands in her lap, and looked at the judge with the direct gaze of a woman who had come a very long distance to say something specific. Reeves led her through it carefully. Who she was, where she had worked, what her position at the county land office had been, what she had seen on a specific day, in a specific month, 3 years prior. "I saw a man named Dern pull the Whitfield file," she said. Her voice was clear. "He had no authorized reason to access it. I asked him about it. He told me it was a routine records check. I knew that wasn't true because there was no active proceeding on the Whitfield land at that time." She paused. "I didn't say anything. I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself I might be wrong." She looked at her hands for a moment. "I wasn't wrong, and it was my business. I know that now." "Why are you coming forward now?" Reeves said. "Because Mrs. Whitfield wrote me a letter," Alice Pratt said. She looked at Clara. "Not to me, to Margaret Harmon, who gave it to her. But when I read Margaret's letter to me about what was being built here, I understood that the only reason it was possible was because someone had refused to accept that this was over." She paused. "I owe that to more than one woman." Hobbs stood for cross-examination. He tried 3 angles. He questioned her timeline, and she gave him the specific date from memory. He questioned her certainty about the file Dern had pulled, and she told him she had personally cataloged that file the week before, and recognized it by the cover notation. He questioned why she had waited so long, and she looked at him with the expression of a woman who had already answered that question for herself, in ways that cost her more than this cross-examination ever could. "I was afraid," she said. "And then I stopped being." Hobbs had nothing for that. He sat down. Clara testified last. She walked to the stand and sat down and looked at the courtroom, at Margaret, at Eleanor, at the Tanners, at Everett Cole, at Reeves at the table, and then at the back row where Ethan Walker sat with his hat in his hands, absolutely still. She looked at Reeves. "Tell the court," he said, "about your husband." She told them. She told them about Daniel Whitfield, who had come to this land as a boy and had worked it with his father and had loved it the way people love things. They build with their own hands, not because of what it was worth, but because of what it held. She told them about his habits with documents, the reading and the rereading, the conversations about what every clause meant before he would put his name to anything. She told them about his handwriting, which she knew as well as she knew her own, because she had been reading it for 9 years. She told them about the morning she had first seen the Pilland documents, about the cold that had moved through her chest, about knowing immediately and without possibility of doubt that her husband had not signed those papers. "How can you be certain?" Reeves said. "Because I know his D," she said. "The loop never closed, not once, not in 9 years of his writing. The loop never closed." She looked at the exhibit table where Webb's comparison lay. "It closes on the Pilland document. That is not my husband's signature." She said it straight, in the quiet voice she used for facts. Hobbs stood for cross-examination. He tried the angle Ethan had predicted. He brought up the lease agreement, the water rights, the number of times Ethan Walker had been present at the ranch during the case preparation. He tried to make it sound like the argument of a woman who had been led somewhere by a man with something to gain. Clara let him finish. Then she said, "Mr. Hobbs, I pointed a rifle at Ethan Walker the morning he showed up at my gate. I told him every man who came to my land wanted something. I made him write up a legal agreement with a witness line before I gave him the time of day." She paused. "I have been making my own decisions on my own land since my husband died. Mr. Walker fixed a fence and gave me county land office records and stayed out of this courtroom today at my request. If you'd like to argue that a widow woman on a Montana mountain can't conduct her own legal case, you're welcome to make that argument. But you're going to have to make it to the 4 families sitting in those benches and to the woman who came from Oregon to tell the truth. And I think you'll find it falls somewhat short." The courtroom was silent. Judge Crane was looking at Clara with an expression she could not categorize, which she suspected meant it was not an expression he wore very often. Hobbs sat down. Reeves made his closing argument in 11 minutes. He laid out the pattern: 4 families, same method, same company, same window of access at the county land office, the same clerk whose name now appeared in federal record. He laid out the handwriting examination. He laid out Alice Pratt's testimony. He laid out the unanswered letters. The manufactured writ, the personal visit from Jonas Pell, with an offer designed to frighten a widow into surrender. He said at the end something that Clara had not known he was going to say. The Pell & Company has operated in this territory for 11 years. In 11 years, they have taken land from people who trusted the legal system to protect them. What they counted on, what this case proves they counted on, is that the people they targeted would be alone, would be without resources, would be without the knowledge that what was being done to them was being done to others. He looked at the judge. Clara Whitfield is not alone. These families are not alone. And the Federal Circuit Court is not a system that can be used to validate what a county clerk and a land company did to these people's names and their land. He sat down. The room was very quiet. Then Jonas Pell made his third mistake. He stood up from the front row. "Your Honor," he said. Crane looked at him over his glasses with the specific expression of a man whose patience has a floor and who has just found it. "Mr. Pell," he said, "sit down." Pell sat down. Crane looked at both tables. He looked at his notes. He looked at the exhibit table. "I am not going to deliberate on this," he said. "The evidentiary record is clear. The motion to dismiss the federal stay is denied. The stay is confirmed and extended to cover all property and personal proceedings related to this matter." He set his pen down. "Furthermore, I am referring the conduct of the Peeland Land and Commerce Company, the activities of former County Clerk Dern and any associated county officials to the Federal Prosecutor's Office for investigation of wire fraud, conspiracy to commit forgery, and corruption of public office." He looked directly at Jonas Pell. "Mr. Pell, I would strongly suggest you retain counsel, not the kind you've been using." He closed his folder. Court is adjourned. The courtroom came apart at the seams. Clara sat at the defense table and did not move for a moment. She heard the sound of people standing, of voices of Margaret Harmon saying something she couldn't make out of Ruth Tanner's sharp intake of breath that turned into something that was not crying, but lived adjacent to it. Reeves turned to her and said, "Clara." She looked at him, He said nothing else. He just looked at her with the expression of a man who had won cases before and knew that winning did not always feel the way you thought it would, that it felt sometimes more like setting something down than picking something up. She stood. Margaret was in front of her before she had fully risen, and Margaret Harmon put both hands on Clara's arms and looked at her with 62 years of a woman who had lost a great deal and had just watched someone refuse to lose the same way. And what was in her face was something that Clara was going to carry for the rest of her life. "Reginald would have liked you very much," Margaret said. Clara pulled her into an embrace that surprised them both. Eleanor Morrison was crying with the particular efficiency of a practical woman who cried fast and stopped quickly, and was already moving to collect her records from the exhibit table before the tears were fully dry. Everett Cole shook Reeves's hand with both of his. Carl Tanner was on his feet, and Ruth was standing beside him with her hand in the crook of his arm, and he was looking at the front of the room with the expression of a man who had gone somewhere quiet inside himself a year and a half ago and was slowly beginning to come back, Alice Pratt found Clara through the press of people. "Thank you," Clara said. "Don't," Alice Pratt said. "Don't thank me for doing what I should have done 3 years ago." But she said it without harshness. She said it like a woman who was reckoning with herself, which was her own business, and she knew it. "I hope the land grows well." "Come and see it," Clara said, "whenever you want." Alice Pratt looked at her for a moment. Then she smiled a small, real smile, the kind that doesn't perform anything. "Maybe I will," she said. Jonas Pell left through the side door with his attorneys surrounding him like a formation, and Clara watched him go. She did not feel what she had expected to feel, which was triumph. What she felt was something quieter and more final, the specific relief of a thing that has been wrong for a long time being returned to right. Not her victory. The truth's victory. She had just been the one who refused to let it stay buried. She turned. Ethan Walker was in the back of the room, making his way toward the door, the way a man does when he is trying not to be in the way. He had his hat on. He was not looking at her. "Ethan," she said. He stopped. She walked through the emptying room to where he stood, and the distance between them was the same as it had always been, the practical distance of two people standing close enough to talk, and also not the same at all. "You came," she said. "I wasn't in the case," he said. "I was just in the room." "I know the difference," she said. He looked at her. The morning light was coming through the windows behind her, and she could see in his face the particular thing that happened when he was deciding whether to say something. He had been holding the same discipline she had watched him apply to everything. The same economy with words that she had come to understand was not coldness, but its opposite. "How are you?" he said. It was such a plain question, such a straightforward, ordinary thing to say after everything. She almost laughed. "I don't know yet," she said. "Ask me again in a week." Something happened at the corner of his mouth. "I'll do that," he said. They stood there for a moment in the emptying room, with the sound of the others outside on the street, and Clara thought about the first morning, the fence post, the rifle, the garden, the question of what he actually wanted. She thought about every piece of evidence assembled on a table that she'd had to fight for alone, and then not alone. She thought about Daniel's handwriting, real and forged side by side. She thought about the loop that never closed. "Walk me back to the horses," she said. He held the door. The ride back to the ranch was easy in the way that things are easy when the weight they carry has finally been set down. Clara rode and felt the Montana summer heat on her arms and the familiar movement of her horse under her, and for the first time in 4 months, 2 weeks, and however many days, she did not count the time. The others rode or drove back in clusters, talking the way people talk, after something has broken open a little louder than usual, with the particular animation of people who have been holding tension for so long that releasing it feels almost like celebrating, even when the thing you fought through was not something you celebrate. Clara and Ethan rode side by side and did not talk much, which was not a gap in the conversation, but a different kind of one, the kind that had enough in it already. When they came over the ridge and the ranch appeared below, Clara felt something move through her that she had no name for. It was not the same thing she felt when she had come home in March to a house where Daniel was no longer. It was related to that feeling, but on the other side of it, beyond it, through it something that recognized the grief and carried it forward instead of being stopped by it. The ranch was the ranch. The house was still broken in places. The south fence needed another rail. The barn door was solid now, and the garden along the south wall was coming in. Well, the tomatoes heavy on the vine, the sunflowers casting long shadows in the afternoon light. She dismounted. She stood and looked at it. "What happens now?" Ethan said. He was standing beside his horse a few feet away, and she could hear in the question that it meant more than the practical, which was fine, because she had an answer for both versions of it. "Now I fix what's broken," she said. "The south fence, the porch, the left beam in the barn that's been worrying me since April." She looked at the house. "I got the feed store to front me half a season of supplies on the strength of the ruling. They weren't willing to do it before, but apparently a federal judge changes the conversation." She paused. And I need to talk to you about expanding the water lease. And I need to... The northeast pasture has been dry all summer, and if I can run a line from the spring... Clara, he said. She stopped. She looked at him. He had his hat in his hands and he was looking at her in the direct, undefended way that she had only seen on him once before the evening in her doorway, when he had told her about his wife, the fever, 6 years alone on the North Ridge. The way a man looks when he has decided to let something be seen. I know what we are, he said. We're neighbors with a legal agreement and a water right and a fraud case that's going federal. He paused. I'm not asking you to be anything different than what you are. Then what are you asking? He was quiet for a moment. Nothing yet, he said. I'm just not riding away. She looked at him. She thought about all the things that had been said and not said over the last 3 weeks in her kitchen, at her gate, on her porch, in the Millview Telegraph office, in the back row of a federal courtroom. She thought about a man who came back with a fence post and no explanation, and a lease agreement with a witness line, who had made himself absent from the one room where his presence could have cost her everything. Who was standing here now, hat in his hands, telling her nothing yet. All right, she said. It was not an answer to everything. It was an answer to enough. She walked to the house. She went inside and stood in the kitchen and put both hands on the table where so many lists had been written and so many cups of coffee had gone cold in the working, and she looked at the notebook on the shelf. She went to it. She took it down. She opened it to the very last page she had written on the night before the hearing. The single line, "Tomorrow we tell the truth in front of people who have the power to do something about it." Below it she wrote, "Today we did." Then she turned to a fresh page. She stood there for a moment with the pen in her hand and thought about what came next. The fence, the pasture, the expanded water lease, the federal prosecution that would take months and would need her testimony again. The families she now knew by name, who were going to need the kind of support that came not from lawyers, but from people who had been through the same thing and had come out the other side. She thought about Margaret Harmon's rented house on the east side of town and what it would mean to have a room for her that was not borrowed, that was simply hers. She thought about sunflowers along a south wall. A man who planted them, because a home without something beautiful is just a building. She wrote at the top of the new page in the careful hand she had always had, "What comes next?" And then she wrote below it, for the first time in 4 months, 2 weeks, and a number of days, she had finally stopped counting, not a list of what she needed, or what she had to prove, or what she was fighting against. She wrote a list of what she was building. The pen moved steadily across the page. Outside, the Montana summer evening was coming down gold and long over the mountains, and the garden was growing, and the ranch was hers. And Clara Whitfield, who had spent the worst season of her life on a cold floor with a rifle and a notebook, and the absolute refusal to be anything less than standing, was still standing. Not because someone had saved her. Because she had never stopped fighting for the right to save herself. And that was a thing. No forged signature. No corrupt clerk, no man with a polished buggy and a practiced smile, no 60-day deadline, and no amount of powerful silence from a town that had decided she was already beaten could ever take away. The notebook was open. The page was filling. She kept writing.